Hi, I'm Maddie,
And I'm Grace.
and welcome to Theraparty. So today we're talking to Aly, who is an AMFT. Aly, do you want to share a little bit about yourself?
Sure. So my name is Aly. I am an associate marriage and family therapist in California, currently based in Sacramento from Chico. So I know that y'all are familiar with Chico State, I believe, or like in their program or aspiring to be in that program. Currently working as an associate marriage and family therapist, getting my hours for licensure.
That's awesome. All
Wow.
right. Did you happen to go to Chico State too?
No, so I was born and raised in Chico, very familiar with the culture up there. I ended up going to Southern California for school. And yeah, so I didn't go to Chico State, but that was one of the programs that I was considering when I was applying to grad school. So I'm kind of familiar.
That's
That's
so
so
cool.
cool.
What made you
Yeah.
interested in the program that you went to?
When I was applying to grad school, I was really looking to check a lot of different boxes. So one box was that it was going to be on track for an MFT licensure. So it had all of the classes and all of the components that basically mean once you graduate from the program, you're ready to apply for licensure. I also wanted something in California, something that I could afford, so something that was public. And ideally, one component that I had was it was somewhere that I would want to be. A minor box that I added was I was hoping to avoid the GRE.
Mm.
So I really didn't want to have to take any exams that I had to study for. I had done the SAT route before going to school, before undergrad, and I really wanted to avoid that. And I did not apply to Chico State because it was a GRE required application at that time. So all of those boxes, I did land on formerly Humboldt State University. Now it's called Cal Poly Humboldt. Very beautiful campus, very beautiful area in Arcata, California. And that was pretty much the only one I applied to, and I got in, and the
Wow.
rest was kind of history.
That's
Oh, wow.
amazing.
That's so cool. That's awesome.
How long was your program?
So Cal Poly Humboldt is a 2-year track. I think that a lot of programs are either 2 or 3 years. It was a 2-year track, pretty much full time,
Mm.
included getting hours at the Counseling and Psychological Services
Mm.
Center on campus, which started as early as the second semester of a 4-semester
Yeah.
program. So
Yeah.
it was kind of rapid. I think from what I've heard, there are programs that take longer, that don't include your clinical hours until after you graduate, things like that. But I was really interested in a 2-year track just because of money and how expensive graduate school can be. So that was part of what attracted me to that. I also want to ask for clarification. Grace, are you the one who's currently in Chico State's program?
Yeah, I am. I'm currently in my first semester, and next semester is when we will start working at the counseling training clinic on campus. So right now I'm just practicing with my peers, but yeah, and it's a 3-year program.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
And then I'm still waiting on that.
yeah, no, Maddie's applying right now.
Yeah, I'm just finishing up my bachelor's in psychology, and then I'm going to go apply for master's programs.
Yeah.
So are you in your senior year at Chico State for psychology?
Yep. Yeah,
Okay.
it's been pretty fun. It's been pretty great. Yeah, and then Grace and I met at the academic advising programs, which was really fun on campus. We
Yeah.
both worked there. We used to work there. So, what inspired you to go into the field?
So I think this is going to be a really common answer if you guys continue on to interview people, or at least part of me hopes that it is a common answer. I was in therapy, right? So I started going to therapy at age 18 when I went to college. It was the first time I could really afford to go to therapy. My school required insurance, so and they had a counseling center on campus. So I started there, really went to therapy for a lot of depression and anxiety symptoms. So, I do have a long history of my own personal growth, healing, whatever journey. And I got into therapy, had two amazing therapists, one at the center and then one who I was referred to after that for longer term support while I was at undergrad. And it was kind of a slow burn, but a very natural progression for me. So when I went to UCLA, I applied as a chemistry major, and I was very interested in chemistry, but I was put off by the idea of working in a lab for the rest of my life. I was put off by the idea of being very isolated, not connected to other people. I was really interested in chemistry, but it was also very difficult competing with a lot of people who wanted to be doctors and engineers in terms of the same academic load as them. So despite getting a C in my intro to psychology course at the end of my freshman year, I changed my major to psychology, didn't really look back, was really fascinated by it as a field of study. And I think around my senior year, it was something I started thinking about more seriously. And I had a therapist who was really, really supportive and really validating that it was something that I would be able to do if I wanted to.
That's amazing.
That's so awesome. I love to hear that. Because I mean, I feel the same way, like I went through my own therapy and felt really inspired and then was really curious about why it worked, why it worked so well. Then I was like, oh, what's this? Doing little Google searches. And I'm in AP psychology, then I'm majoring in it at Chico State, So I love that you have that same kind of inspiration.
Yeah, I do. I agree, Aly. I do think it's probably common in a lot of therapists or people who want to become therapists to have already gone to therapy themselves or struggled with mental health in some way. And I feel like it makes us better therapists that way because we have a lot of empathy for those who struggle with their mental health.
I have a lot of opinions about that.
Yeah.
I mean, it could come up as we go, but yeah, I really strongly believe that if you're in this field, you should be in your own therapy or you should have a history of being in therapy. One way that it was put for me that I heard in grad school was you have to put in your time on the couch before you can sit in the chair. And I feel that really strongly just because of the power dynamic that can be created in therapeutic work. And if you don't understand what it feels like on the other side of that, I think that it could be potentially harmful in your clinical work to not really understand the gravity of what you're doing and how it can impact another person who's sitting on the couch as opposed to the chair.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. Oh man, I wrote that down because I really like that. You have to put your time in the couch before you get to be in the chair. I like that.
Yeah. Yeah, I feel like Maddie and I often talk about like our worries of getting into grad school, applying to grad school, becoming a therapist. Yeah, and your words really help, I think, because Maddie and I have definitely like both really tried to pursue that personal growth in therapy. So that makes me feel better.
Yeah. It's nice to hear the commonalities. It's nice to hear
it is. So if you want to share, I'm curious what one challenge was that you faced within your grad program and how you overcame it, or if you had any challenges at all, or maybe something that challenged you before you got into your grad program as well.
I think that anyone who says that they didn't have challenges in grad school is probably lying. Grad school is so intense, at least in my program. Maybe it was because it was a 2-year track instead of a 3-year track. But my experience of grad school was overwhelmingly positive, but I will say there were definitely challenges. Depending on the nature of your program, grad school can be very insulated and it can be like a pressure cooker, both socially and professionally. And it can be really, really consuming. It can be really defining for your whole life, for your world, for your identity. And being in that pressure cooker can really shift your perspective on your own life and what's important. And it can make things feel so much bigger than they actually are when you're experiencing it, right? If there's tensions in the clinical space, if you're not sure what to do with a client, if there's different dynamics that come up when you're practicing with your peers, right? There's a lot of opportunity for things to feel really high pressure and intense because, at least in my program, it was, I think, less than 12 people, but it was 10 people who you have in the same classes, same routine. You spend hours and hours and hours together every single week for 2 years straight. And it's the same core group of people. And so I think that there are a lot of opportunities for there to be insecurities about yourself that come out in such a small cohort, insecurities in your role as a clinician for the very first time. It's very sensitive work, and it can be really difficult to have perspective, I guess, while you're in that pressure cooker of an environment. Mm-hmm. So that's one aspect that was challenging. I will say, and this goes beyond grad school too, there are a lot of personalities that you will encounter in this field, and you are not likely to gel with 100% of those people, right? I think that a lot of us assume, or at least what I assumed going into this field, was that everyone had the same values as me. Everyone had a similar perspective on what it meant to be a therapist and why we were there. And like any profession, whether it's a doctor, a teacher, a lawyer, whatever, not everyone has the same intentions, the same hopes, the same morality, the same aspirations in this work. Mm-hmm. And that can be really challenging, dealing with very sensitive stuff and dealing with just the culture too. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of expectations that come with being in a culture of therapists, and a lot of, for me, it was difficult to feel like I always had to be right or kind of performing as a therapist at all times in all of these different environments, like not just in the clinical area, not just in supervision, but also in every class and every project and every time I was interacting with anyone in the program. So ultimately, all of that is to say that there's an enormous amount of pressure that can be created in a very small environment over time. And it can be difficult to make sense of. It can be difficult to have perspective of your life outside of that. And so in terms of how I overcame that, I do think it's really important to have strong social support. For me, that was inside the program and outside of the program. So that I think it's important to have people to kind of bring you back down to earth and let you remember that this is just grad school, right? But when you're in it, it feels like your whole world. That's my soapbox for that. But I think that the small cohorts can be difficult to navigate, I guess, over time.
Yeah, I liked your analogy of the pressure cooker. That's a good one. It's true.
How big is your cohort, Grace?
Yeah, my cohort is 20 people. So they added two more spots this year. And I think their goal is to slowly add more people or more spots. But yeah, 20, I guess I wonder if 20 feels like less pressure, just because, I don't know. So yours was 10?
Yeah.
10?
So it's a very tight-knit group.
Yeah.
And just feeling like maybe there's like nowhere to hide in your whole grad program when it's that small, right? Yeah. And a very intimate course or set of courses, I should say, with the same people, it can feel like you're kind of supposed to be on all the time, and filling the role of what a therapist should be was a lot of pressure, at least for me. I mean, I started the program when I was 23, 24. I think I was 23, which was a lot of pressure for that age too.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's a lot of pressure too when you've never practiced being a therapist too. Yeah, you kind of have to start practicing from the get-go, and that's a lot. Thanks for sharing.
Yeah, I have a question. So you're kind of talking about like this this pressure to perform, you know. I have a sociology minor, so this is like Oh, I'm so interested. So I'm kind of curious, like, do you feel like you kind of like have a therapist hat that you kind of have learned to put on and off? And like, how do you, I don't know, this is a complicated question, but how do you kind of find the distinction between yourself as a therapist and acting as a therapist and yourself as a whole human being who's does not need to dive into the nooks and crannies with every person that you meet, you know?
I think that's a really great question. And I will say, if you're asking if there's a hat, there is one, because I say that to clients too. Like I say, like, oh, I'm putting on my teacher hat real quick if I'm going to be more direct, or like I've used that language before.
Yes.
In terms of how I do it, I think that that's something that feels so like intangible and kind of difficult to describe. I think that ultimately it does kind of come back to that power dynamic that I spoke about. Like, regardless of what I want it to be, if I want there to be a power dynamic in the room or not, there is one, right? Someone is coming to you. They're either paying you or they're paying you with their energy and time and their insurance to get something from you, right? There is a hierarchy that is created, and I don't necessarily want to be in a power position, but you inherently are in therapy. And I think that part of the difference with that hat is putting on the hat is understanding the power dynamic and the power differential, I guess, and trying to treat that with respect and sensitivity. Whereas in your normal life, that doesn't exist, or it might exist in different ways, in more nuanced ways. But if I'm talking to a friend, a partner, a colleague, there's not the expectation that I have a role that has responsibilities, or that I have a role, a level of influence over them. That's the same as when I'm working with a client. There's a lot of influence, or a lot more power to your influence when you are in the therapy space.
Yeah.
Right. That's awesome. Yeah. Okay, that makes total sense. I like it. I like the way that you described like the power dynamics and looking at the hierarchy with a client and outside of the client space. That's very interesting.
I mean, I also think that just some of the skills that you use with clients versus with friends, it can feel very different. Like if you just tried to act like a therapist all the time, I'm not going to say that this will be your experience, but I would find that exhausting. Like I don't have friends for the purpose of giving me therapy. I have friends for whatever else we do and talk about and have fun with, right? If a friend was, I have friends, two of my very best friends are therapists who I met in the program. And if they acted like therapists with me, I would probably not be friends with them. I would get a therapist to do that. But that's not what I'm looking for. I'm looking for engagement. I'm looking for an equal relationship. And I certainly don't mean to imply that I don't want an equal relationship in the client space, but no matter how much we strive for that, there is a difference of power, or a different level, a different weight that your influence carries in that relationship compared to other relationships.
Yes. Yeah. There's so many cool things to talk about with therapy.
Yeah, and you speak so eloquently too about it, Aly. I feel like I just read a chapter about power dynamics. So I'm learning about expert power, referent power, I think is one of them. Anyway, so I'm just now learning that, and it's really cool to like see that those ideas have been planted in you a bit more deeply than they are in me, and you're having to actually think about that because now you're an associate. So that's pretty cool. Maddie, do you want to ask this next question?
Oh yeah, let's see. Okay. What were your most memorable moments when in grad school? What were your highs? What were your lows, if you want to share?
Yeah. On a personal level, some of the highs and the most memorable aspects are definitely just the friendships that I made in grad school. So if there is one thing I would really emphasize, it would be to find your people in your program. And if you don't find your people in your program, find them elsewhere. Because having solidarity, having a level of support when you're navigating stuff that feels really high stakes, really emotional, really intense, it can be really scary to navigate alone. So I will say just a level of community that was created among other therapists was a high. In terms of the clinical work, there are still cases that I remember. I'm not going to go into details, but I worked at the counseling center on campus, and it is meant to be short-term therapy. I would assume that your program, Grace, is the same, where it's an average of 6 sessions. You can probably, or at least in my program, we would have to ask or get approval for more than 6, and it would probably go up to 12, but it's unlikely to really go beyond that. Working at the counseling center within the short-term model, I think it was really fascinating to see how much change could happen in such a short amount of time. So there are cases where being so early on, being so unsure of my role as a therapist, using just the most cookie cutter interventions, or doing like really basic skills that are being taught, I was able to witness the effect of that on someone's life and have it be huge and like really shift where they're at, right? Not every person, not every client has that relationship with therapy, but there are people who will come to therapy and really just having the therapeutic space, having reflection, having more awareness to themselves, their behaviors, their thoughts. Sometimes that is a huge shift that can happen immediately for people. Whereas they might be operating on autopilot, and then the awareness really shifts into a place of intention. Not every case is that easy, but there are cases that I remember where having just even a basic understanding of therapeutic work was shifting someone's life. And so that definitely stands out as a high point of being able to feel like, wow, even doing maybe quote unquote the bare minimum here is changing someone's life or changing this moment of their life in a very real way. I think that it was really interesting, basically, overall, to see how much could happen in a short amount of time.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
So awesome. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's interesting because I feel like Grace and I have talked about this before. I don't know if you've ever been in like an academic advising space, but as academic advising interns, what we did was work one-on-one with students and kind of like help them with like their classes, but also like if they were on academic notice or have been disqualified from the university, we helped them with that. And I've had like just maybe like I could probably count them on my hands, like how many students I've had where like you've gotten to have like a really good conversation with them and then they come back and they feel better or they feel excited or they're like, wow, that was a great semester, or I'm feeling excited about my classes, and it's like, oh, my heart is just bursting for you right now, you know? And I'm like, it's so cool to hear about that kind of feeling almost of like that. Like you've been able to help and then you've kind of like seen you've used your most basic tools and then it helped and you got to see that, you know, and I'm like, ah, oh, I love that. I love that about that.
Seeing the fruits of your labor in real time.
Yeah, and like seeing that it's like beneficial and like that they're feeling happy about it, you know, and that you've done something good, you've put some good out into the world. It's beautiful.
Yeah. Yeah, that is amazing. I think when we've talked about it, talked about like my next semester of having shorter term sessions, or duration of sessions with clients, it's kind of stressed me out because I feel like for me personally, having a long term duration of seeing a therapist was very helpful. I mean, I was very privileged and lucky to be able to see my therapist for a very long time, but yeah, it's really nice to know and to hear that you can see like the development of your clients in a short amount of time and feel good about it. That makes me excited. Yeah. Thank you so much for all of your answers, Aly. This is awesome. So we were curious in what kind of setting, if you're willing to share, in what kind of setting do you currently work? Like, I don't know if you work at like an agency or something. I did see your Psychology Today profile, which was so cool to see.
Yeah, so right now I'm essentially working in private practice. So in this state, and I believe in many states, therapists can't work privately until they are licensed. But basically what happens is there will be a licensed therapist who is your boss, and you work under their license in the private practice space. That's kind of like the workaround. So I don't have my own private practice, but I'm essentially working as kind of like an independent contractor. That's the best way I can explain it. I essentially work independently, but under my supervisor's license.
Wow.
So right now I'm working from home. I just work virtually. Part of that is just because office space is really expensive. And so I would love to go back to part-time in person in the near future when I get licensed, but I think that it's definitely a barrier if you choose to work privately because all of those expenses would come on you. But I have worked in agency settings as well, and obviously at the university before. So those are primarily the areas that I have experience in. I've never worked for a county or like a public behavioral health center or anything like that, or in a hospital or a rehabilitation center. So primarily I've been in private practice and also in agency settings.
Okay. Was there one that was more to your liking, I guess?
There's a lot of pros and cons to all of it, and a lot of it depends on the lifestyle question. So there are things I definitely like and dislike about all of the positions that I've been in. Part of why I did the route that I did, which was basically agency setting or private practice, was that I personally did not feel like I was emotionally strong enough to do the type of intense work that comes with being in a hospital or a rehabilitation center. So at least my experience in grad school, every time I talked with people who had that experience or heard about it or like looked on Reddit about it, whatever it was basically horror stories about having way too many clients, way too many people on your caseload, working 10-hour shifts, not getting breaks, seeing so many people that are really high risk. And I personally just didn't want to approach that. Where I'm at now, I could see the value of going there for a short period of time to learn a lot in a short amount of time and then making a lifestyle decision after being an associate. So that is something that I would consider doing differently were I to go back. But what I do like about working in an agency or a private practice is you have a lot of autonomy and a lot of agency over who you see, who you work with, what types of cases you take when you're actually working, right? I'm not willing to work after 6:30 in the evening at this point. Like I want to spend time with my partner and my cat. So I'm able to set my own schedule. I'm able to work as many hours or as few, within reason, given my supervisor's approval. But there's a lot of control that you have over your schedule, but there's a lot less stability and a lot more risk in terms of finances. So I will say it is like a privileged position to be able to work privately because like I'm uninsured. I don't have health insurance, or I'm in the process of getting it through the state. But for example, like my health is fine. So that's part of what weighs into that decision. But I don't have a salaried position is mainly the point. Like I'm paid hourly, and it's if I'm not seeing clients, I'm not getting paid.
Right.
And so being independent in that way comes with the pros of having a lot of agency and control over your life and your schedule. But it also comes with the risk of there not being stability. When people cancel, that's it. You don't get paid. So there's not as much of a safety net in this type of job.
You mentioned that you see like clients on a day-to-day basis and you get to kind of choose your schedule. About how many clients do you see a day, or like what's your kind of max?
So that really depends. I think that exceptions are made definitely if I have to make an exception, like I'm trying to go out of town or something like that. I personally am not really comfortable seeing more than 6 people in a day. For me, I can feel my brain like turning off near the end of the day. And that is something that I have an opinion about. You're going to hear it. You're going to see it, whether it's on Instagram Reels or Reddit or wherever you're looking for content. You're going to see people making jokes and memes about seeing 10, 12, 15 people in a day. I personally, I am not afraid of going on the record of saying I personally believe that's unethical. I just don't think it's ethical. Your brain does not. I mean, I think maybe there are some people who have different capacities than myself, and it's something that they learn because they have to learn, such as working in a hospital setting or a rehabilitation center. For me, I can feel the quality of care decreasing if I see more than 6 people. Even 6, depending on a day, it's a hard day. It's like a difficult day for me. On average, it definitely depends right now. So that is part of working privately is my schedule, at least based on how I run it. I try to be flexible and accommodating of my clients because I want to keep them. And because I care about them and I want them to know that I care if their dog gets sick or something comes up and they can't meet at the same time. But right now it could range from anywhere from 1 to 6 people in a day. It really depends on a lot of other factors, just like my caseload, when clients are available. It's kind of like Tetrising my schedule, but I prefer closer to 4 sessions a day.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
I'm so curious about scheduling. So this is fun. And I had the exact same question that you had, Maddie. For me, I have always been worried about seeing clients back to back because I've never done that before. And it's something that I would like to practice next semester in practicum if possible. But I'm curious if you have a longer day where you're seeing multiple clients, do you intentionally add larger breaks in between, or do you see them 10 minutes after each other?
Yeah, that's a great question. Sometimes things do not go the way you want when you're scheduling, right? Sometimes when you're Tetrising someone into your schedule, the only time that works is not ideal. So there have been times where there aren't breaks and there are times when there are. What my preference is at this point, if I'm seeing 6 clients in a day, I prefer there to be blocks of people rather than a bunch of little breaks. So I will see, I think, I'm not really sure what's preferable for me at this point, but for example, yesterday it was a 2 and a 4. So I had 2 back to back. I had a couple hour break for lunch or napping or eating or whatever. And then I saw 4 people back to back. I think the 4th is going to be the hardest. And it is a muscle that you build over time. But I personally do back to backs because the amount of anticipation feeling, at least when I was earlier in my career, was just not fun because when you're waiting, you still feel like you're working, but you're not accomplishing anything and you're not making money. And so the period of time in between sessions can sometimes feel like dead time. And so I prefer to minimize that. And by that, I just mean if I had a bunch of 30-minute gaps throughout my day, I would not want that because I wouldn't really reasonably accomplish anything in that amount of time, other than maybe notes and documentation. But ultimately, it would be a lot of waiting. So I prefer to block my schedule. I would not see 6 people with back to back, no breaks. 4 is probably my limit, but that's usually what I do. And it is difficult. And that was something that was an adjustment being in practicum and learning to be able to see people back to back. I don't remember exactly, but I would imagine by the time I graduated, I had done maybe 2 sessions back to back or 3 sessions back to back. And it probably would have been really intimidating to think about continuing that or doing 4 or more. It is just something you build over time. And it is motivation to finish at the 50-minute mark for sure, so that you get a little bit of a break.
Yeah, that's true.
Oh, what are the populations that you work with or would like to work with in the future?
I really like having a balance of different types of individuals. So right now I work with, at any given time, I'd like to work with maybe 3 to 5 teenagers, just because that's a population I like working with. I find them to be really fun and energetic and exciting and also really, really meaningful. And then I don't currently work with couples, but I would like to reintegrate couples work at some point when I'm licensed. So ideally it would be maybe 3 to 5 teenagers on my caseload, maybe 2 to 4 couples, and the rest would be adult individuals. In terms of the population, I really like working with, it skews female just because it's more common for women to seek therapy. But in terms of who, it's really anyone. It's just going to be more so about their presenting concerns that I would tailor to rather than like their identity factors at that point.
Right. I think we more meant maybe like what symptoms do you kind of like cater to? You know, like anxiety, depression, like
Yeah.
stuff like
Yeah.
or do you kind of like go out the norm and do like ACEs or like, you know?
Yeah, no, I totally get what you're saying. Yeah, so I would say that right now I'm probably categorically a generalist. So a lot of generalist work is primarily going to be anxiety and depression because those are the most common by far. Outside of that, it is going to include some level of probably complex trauma at this point. A lot of people, regardless of what they say they're coming to therapy for, have something to unpack from their childhood, whether it's relationships with family dynamics, whether it is like social dynamics in school or something. There's usually something that's going to be psychodynamic about it that's going to be about resolving issues from the past. In terms of what other like areas that I like to work with, I do really like working with anxiety. I have to be very intentional about how many clients I have on my caseload at any given time that have higher levels of depression or suicidality because it can be very intense and draining on my system. So that certainly wouldn't be something that, at least for me, I would be able to specialize in and primarily work with. In terms of people what I want to work with, that is kind of evolving, right? So as an associate, I think it's difficult to be specialized in anything, right? I think that we use that language because it helps us to attract the clients that we want to work with and that we are learning to work with. But I think the language of saying you specialize in it, it's very rare for that to actually apply to a lot of associates, right? Like I know an associate who I work with, and she worked at an OCD center before getting her degree or while she was getting her degree. And now, like, I think that she can say she specializes in OCD because that is a place she worked. But for the vast majority of folks, it's hard to have a specialization at this point. So really it is about what I'm aspiring to specialize in. And I think that that has been part of my journey in these last few years, is trying to find my niche. What I'm interested in is really working from an existential framework. I think that what that means is kind of different for me now than hopefully it will be in the future. Hopefully it will be more concrete and more a part of my like treatment planning and like very specific interventions. But I also think that existential work inherently is very fluid and dynamic and kind of moment to moment in some ways. So I'm really interested in advancing my approaches through an existential lens. Outside of that, I am interested in working with people with climate anxiety, political anxiety. I think that those things are very up and coming and very present and also very much related to existentialism. Some things I've kind of flirted with and thought about are potentially trying to get more experience or training to specialize in OCD or complex trauma, potentially using like one approach I'm interested in is internal family systems, which is really popular right now, but it's also very, very difficult to get into because it's very expensive and very exclusive. So those are some areas. I think it's really always in development. Ultimately, I'm interested in working with people who are existentially oriented themselves. And I'm interested in working with people who are very creative and people who are very engaged in the therapeutic process. So I'd say like what I'm really looking for is like a personality type that would fit well with mine in the therapeutic context, more so than very specific issues, right? There are issues that I wouldn't really touch or I would refer out if that was their presenting concern. But a lot of people have a lot of things going on. It's not black and white, right? I enjoy working through the lens where things are a little bit more eclectic and a few different things going on at once. It keeps things interesting and yeah, so if I do end up niching, which I think I should, I think it's very smart to have a niche in this field, specifically if you're hoping to work privately or in a group practice, in terms of financially just being able to bring clients in because you offer something very specific. But if what that is, I don't know what it is yet. I'm also interested in grief work, but I don't really know how and when some of those niches might develop, I guess.
Yeah. One of the things that inspired me to like look into becoming a therapist was reading like existential humanistic psychology and like getting really into existentialism. So, love that.
Aly, do you have like a book recommendation? I don't know if you've read any like books about existential psychology before.
I've definitely dabbled. I will say that my experience in grad school reading so much required reading really kind of burned me out for my own personal reading at this point, if it's therapeutic, right? The last few years, I've returned to reading really in a very fun way of focusing on fiction and just participating in that way. So I wouldn't say that I have a lot of recommendations. I've kind of been reading Man's Search for Meaning, which is a very popular, I believe it's Frankl. And I'm kind of in the process of reading that, which I know has an existential leaning, which I've heard great things about, enjoying it. I'm also in the process of reading No Bad Parts is one I'm reading because it's really focused on parts work, which is an approach I've been kind of learning and experimenting with one of my current supervisors. I will say a lot of my learning was really focused on like more textbooks and articles and things like that throughout grad school. And that was so heavy that I've taken time to return to psychological reading for fun, just because of how intense the reading load was in grad school. Yeah, I also think that there's a lot of books that are like fiction that can be really inspiring regarding existentialism. I believe, what is it? The Stranger was one that I read in a book club that I feel like is not meant to be for therapy, but it's really inspiring and has a lot of existential themes in it. So,
yeah.
And that's Camus.
Yeah. I want to read the Viktor Frankl book. Yeah, that's on my list. And I mean, I'm not there yet, but I totally understand like the influx of books you have to read for grad school. It's a lot. So this is the last little portion of our podcast episode. This has been such a good episode so far. So this is our therapy time. So we're kind of just going to party it up now and talk about the fun things of being a therapist. So our first question is, what is one thing you wish you had known before pursuing becoming a therapist?
I think that's a difficult question, right? A lot of this process is long and kind of arduous. And so looking back on it, I think it's difficult for me to look at it a little bit from that like what if standpoint, because I feel like it all got me here and I am in a good place with my career. So I think one answer is that I didn't really know going into it that grad school is really like the first 2 years of a 4 to 6 year process, probably more likely 5 or 6. Granted, there are people who will go right out the gate into a really intense job, get all of their hours and get closer to the 2 year track. I'm approaching 2.5 right now post graduating. And I just don't think you really have an awareness of what that process is like. It's not so much like going to school, you graduate and you're done. It really isn't. It is an extended period of learning and being in an associate position. One thing that I wish I had known potentially earlier is kind of what I said earlier, where making a decision to potentially sacrifice lifestyle could potentially give you so much more information and training in the short term, right? That is something I heard. I heard very mixed things, but almost anyone I've spoken to who did like an LCSW route really, really valued being in those high acuity, high intensity settings like hospitals, rehabilitation centers, community centers, where that lifestyle isn't going to be great. It's going to be really intense and really hard, but when I've talked with other therapists who have done it, the knowledge that they got from that, they really speak really highly of that experience. So I think that I wish I had known that like maybe sacrificing short term after graduating would be a way to learn a lot in a short amount of time and still get me to a lifestyle that I want. Like if I could do anything differently, maybe I would have done something more intense, like working for the county for like 1 year after graduating, for example. I don't know that I regret it because I'm pretty happy with my placements and what I've learned, but that's something that I think I'll always look back on as like maybe missing out on, and something that at this point, I'm kind of established in a more comfortable rhythm in agency settings or in private practice. So I don't really want to go back now, but that's one thing that maybe I would have considered. Now I would consider for myself more so than I did at the time.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I think thinking about lifestyle changes is really important. And I hope to reflect on that a bit more too, because I know that I'm really into comfort. And that's something I've been working on in therapy with my therapist, trying to expand and extend my comfort level. So yeah, it would be cool to be able to try things out before I get settled in a certain environment. Maddie, you want to ask this next question?
Yes. All right. What is one of your favorite parts of the therapeutic process and just about being a therapist in general?
Something that I take to heart in this work is really just the genuine connection that you make with people. Again, this might depend on the setting that you're working in, like what that connection is, like how like emotionally intimate it might feel or not. But for me and the type of work that I do, I really, really value being able to meet people who are inspiring, insightful, sensitive, smart, kind, like just amazing people that I wouldn't have met otherwise. And there's a very unique dynamic that connects us that I feel is really powerful. And it is different because of those things we've talked about, like the power dynamic and the intention or the weight of my role in it, right? But there is something that's so human about that connection. At the end of the day, it is a relationship. And I have a lot of these relationships in my life. And being able to be in people's lives, even in really small ways, like 1 hour every week or 2 hours a month, it's like a privilege. And it's something that is really touching that I think is easy for an outsider to see as like, oh, that's just their job. But like, I think about my clients all the time. Like they touch me. I recently experienced a loss in my life. And even in very small ways, I had a lot of clients who said very genuine things to me in response to that. And being reminded of the connection that's very real about how much I care for them and how much they care for me, like it's not bullshit. And I really think that like it's really simple, but being able to have different but very real relationships with so many people and be able to touch their lives in hopefully a positive way and have them touch mine, it's like that's why you do it. That's why I do it, right? I mean, some people might have different approaches, but that's what keeps me doing this is having real connections and being on a shared journey as humans, right? That's kind of the existential approach. Is I might sometimes be put in the expert position because it's my job and because there's money or because there's insurance or whatever, but being two humans on a shared journey of life and being able to influence one another is just really powerful, like sacred work to me.
That's such a beautiful answer. Oh my gosh.
Beautiful.
Yeah, I'm so looking forward to having clients where we get to share that human connection. It's very special.
Super exciting. Super, super exciting.
The last question we have here is, what is one piece of advice you would give a new marriage and family therapy graduate student, or any other student that has just graduated from a counseling master's program?
For someone who's already graduated?
Yeah, or someone who just has recently graduated. How about that?
Okay. In terms of becoming an associate, or whether that is an AMFT or an LCSW or an LPCC, or I don't know what LPCCs are when they're associates, whatever track it is, one piece of advice is really learn how to advocate for yourself, right? I don't mean to be really spooky in October month, but this field can be really exploitative of associates, right? Because it's cheap labor. You're, at least for me, and I understand this is how it works, but in grad school, if you work at the university, you are paying to provide a service. Like, you are paying with your tuition money to not be paid for providing a service to someone, right? And while that changes when you graduate, there are not that many safeguards for providing like healthy work dynamics, right? I've been really blessed in my experiences to have primarily positive experiences in my workplaces. But there are jobs where they will want to pay you very little. They will want to give you clients that you're not ready to see. They will not want to provide you the amount of supervision or the quality of supervision that you need. And so I think that without being too scary to people, I think that you should have to be very discerning of job opportunities and really be able to advocate for yourself and what you need, right? And that goes beyond just what the BBS says that you need. It goes further to like what you're comfortable and able to do. I think that there's a healthy amount of challenge that should be involved too. Like I said, like working at a community center or working at the county behavioral health unit, like that would be very challenging and probably wouldn't really fit all of your comfy feelings of getting your needs met, right? But the challenge would be worth it because of what you're learning. But I think that there are a lot of positions where what you find challenging isn't going to be to your benefit, right? The challenge is something that could be avoided. So I think it's important to be able to advocate for yourself in terms of like supervision, hours, population, like getting outside support for different cases that you might need. I do think that's just really important. And I think that there are a lot of incredible opportunities too, but you have to be able to know what you're looking for. And so for that, I would really just recommend while you're in the program, or even if you already graduated from your program, speaking to people who graduated before you, speaking to people at the clinic that you worked at, what was their path, and really understanding like what types of positions and how they got those types of positions. So I think that self-advocacy and awareness in the job search is going to be really important. Outside of that, this would apply to anyone who's like going into a program too. Go to therapy. Like, for real, I do not trust therapists who haven't been in therapy. I think there's something ego related for someone who isn't in therapy. And I'm not saying you have to be in it forever or even long term. I only recently started therapy again for the first time in around 2 years, just because of finances. Was in therapy for many years before that. But I think that it's important to know what you're dealing with and who you are and what you're bringing to that room. Because when you're having reactions, or we call it countertransference in therapy, you need to not just be aware of that, but you need to have a handle on that in order to do this work. And also, it's going to be really good learning experience for you doing the work, is being able to learn from your own therapist. There are things that therapists have said to me that I get to use now to help other people.
Mm-hmm. I like that. I like that a lot. That's so cool.
Yeah. I know my old therapist, she'd often use a lot of metaphors, and they've always like stuck with me to this day. So to be able to use those when I'm a therapist would be really cool.
Metaphors are huge. You're going to collect those like, precious gems. I mean, that's mainly me because I'm kind of oriented towards ACT. But yeah, I remember metaphors that were used on me that I now use that are my favorite, that it's good to have in your back pocket.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I did have, Maddie, do you have anything to say? Because I do have one other question.
I was just about to say, I think all of my questions have been answered. So what are yours, Grace?
Okay, my last one, just because, this episode was very focused on like, obviously the grad program and then what it's like being an associate. But I know that you said, Aly, that you're 2.5 years into, I think, accumulating your hours after having graduated. Are you close to, taking the license exam? What does that look like? Are you excited? Are you stressed about it? Because I know that's like that's probably a goal of yours. And I'd love to just touch on that.
Yeah. I have a spreadsheet here with all of my hours that is up to date as of like 2 weeks ago. So that is one other piece of advice for people who are in the program or outside of the program. Track your hours now. You do not want to have to do that later. It's going to suck. So track I just do it in a Google Sheet, but keep track of everything that you're going to need when you apply for licensure, because it's going to be a real headache having to redo that or go back and get things signed and things like that. I recommend just being on your paperwork from the beginning, tracking your hours. I am over 75% done with my total hours. I really only need, in terms of like client facing hours, around 400 left. I don't work as many hours per week as I could. I kind of work closer to, I guess, someone outside of the field, it would be considered part-time. For me, I think I'm halfway between part-time and full-time because of the emotional, energetic toll of therapeutic work. So it will probably take me till the beginning of next year, hopefully, before I'm done. I also had a few like setbacks with my hours just because I moved and didn't have a job lined up due to my partner moving for a job. And so I think that if I didn't have some periods where I wasn't working, I probably would have been closer to like a 2, like probably would be ready by now.
Mm-hmm.
And that was my goal. So it's been really hard to have to adjust my expectations there.
Yeah.
One of my friends just submitted her hours. But one thing you have to be prepared for is when you finish your hours and you submit the paperwork, the BBS, at least right now, will take their sweet time approving you for the exam. So my friend just submitted her hours. She probably won't be able to take the exam until next year. Could be January, February, maybe. We don't really know. It could be as quickly as maybe 2 months, but they say it could be anywhere up to 6 months. So there's a lot of waiting in that. So I'm very eagerly hoping to get licensed, but because of some logistical things that have happened in my life, especially recently, I've had to kind of slow down a little bit. I'm probably going to get there closer at the 3-year mark, be licensed, which I'm happy about. In terms of preparation, I fully intend to shell out for, I think it's the Therapist Development Center's course. I do not want to take that test more than once. So I did a similar thing for the law and ethics exam, shelling out some money, splitting it with a couple colleagues and like using some of the same resources and test prep in order to do that exam. But yeah, I'm not going to start getting eager until I submit the paperwork, I think, before I start studying.
Yeah, that's really exciting that you're super close.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Wow.
That's awesome. All right, do you have any like final thoughts for us or anything that you want to share like before we go?
A final thought, I guess, is that this work is so diverse. Like therapy can look so differently depending on where you study, what you study, where you work, what your supervisors teach. And I think that there are a lot of contradictions in the therapy field, right? There's a lot of opinions or perspectives that can feel like against one another. And for me, at one point, especially I think in grad school, that became really overwhelming, right? Because there's the belief that simultaneously we are supposed to fix people. They're coming to us for a service. We are supposed to change them. And then there's the simultaneous belief of we cannot fix people no matter what we want, right? I think that being in this field, you have to have a certain level of act term psychological flexibility of being able to carry multiple things as being true and being able to find out what that truth is for you, of what your role is and what your identity is as a therapist. And I think I've conveyed this, but a big part of my identity as a therapist is I take it as a very serious responsibility. It is Spider-Man, right? With great power comes great responsibility. And what I would hope for most people who go into this field, that it might seem kind of boring thinking about like the ethics, especially when you take a law and ethics class. Let those ethics be a foundation that you build your identity on top of, right? Some of it can be bureaucratic. Some of it can feel kind of stupid, like dealing with insurance. Insurance isn't necessarily ethical in a lot of ways, but let your ethics and your own morality guide you for what your role is, because you're going to hear a lot of differing opinions about what's right and what's wrong. You know, people will praise CBT because it has so much research support for being evidence-based. And then a lot of people will say, like, it's so cold, it's so detached, people won't change, people won't benefit from that. You're going to hear conflicting feelings and opinions about everything. And so you have to have a strong foundation of what you're doing. And I think that that is kind of personal. It can be communal, like it can be among your cohort, it can be among your colleagues, but really let yourself build that identity. And my recommendation is to build it on your understanding of ethics.
That's wonderful. I love ethics. I actually was super stressed about my law and ethics class this semester, but it's actually become probably one of my favorite classes.
It's one of the fun things that's actually, or the few things that is actually sometimes black and white in this field.
Yes. Yeah, which is maybe why I like it. But no, it's fun to talk about like our personal values and worldviews and how that might apply as us being therapists. Thanks, Aly. This was so fun.
Thank you. This was awesome. It was so helpful to be able to hear all of this and have this conversation. As somebody who's looking to apply for graduate school, you know, this was so awesome to be able to share experiences, share opinions and everything, and be able to get another outside perspective. So it was
Yeah.
awesome. I'm gonna go have a writing sesh after this. My little written interview questions.
I really feel like this is important work and like really interesting, fascinating, fun, heartbreaking. Like there's so many different ranges to this work. And I do think that trying to foster community in this work, especially because at times, if both of you went on to be private practice therapists, it can be isolating in some ways, right? Like I'm having a lot of connection with a lot of people, but you're also kind of isolated. So building community is so important. I really feel like I didn't have a lot of guidance going into grad school, so I definitely like trying to pay that forward. Again, I'm no expert, but this is my job that I've been doing for a couple of years now. So if there's any other questions or things that I could help with or guide either of you on in any small way, I'd be happy to be a resource for you guys.
That's so awesome. Wow. Thank you.
Yeah, no, you're super inspiring. I can't wait to listen to this episode. And yeah, just relearn everything that you said. And yeah, it's been wonderful to gain some insight from you and talk about this fun therapy stuff. Therapy is awesome.
It is. I think that's a great way to leave it too. Therapy is awesome. So cool.
Yeah, and I wish you luck too, Aly, in just accumulating the rest of your hours.
Thank you.
And yeah, again, super inspiring. It's awesome to see or to have met someone now who's graduated from their program and is an associate.
Yeah, absolutely. Final thing that I'm going to remind you guys too, just mainly for you, try to get your child or family hours at the beginning of being an associate. Don't do it later. It's going to be really hard and stressful to try to find a job to suddenly see it. Like it's just a really bad idea. Like I don't like working with kids really. But my first job graduating, I got working with kids because I heard so many stories of like, you could get all your hours and then be like, okay, I need 300 hours with kids. Okay. Trying to find a new job working with kids or with couples or with families. Like try to do those hours as soon as you graduate. So that you don't have to go searching desperately and delaying when you're going to submit your hours.
Yeah, thank you for that tip. I did not know that was a thing. That's great. Thank you.
Write that down.
Wow. Well, again, we really appreciate having you on this podcast. Our first little interview episode, Aly. It was a pleasure to meet you and talk with you. Yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah, of course. Better, Grace.